Let's get some reaction from Harjap Singh Bhangal, who's a UK immigration solicitor. Hello to you, Harjap. Thanks very much indeed for coming on.
Hi there, good morning.
So I've got a few questions because, and I'm sure many of my listeners will as well, because some parts of this just don't seem to necessarily make sense. I mean, firstly, if this is a payment that will be directed at failed asylum seekers, then surely if their asylum application has been heard and it's been judged that they're not genuine asylum seekers, why would they not just be put on a plane and sent home anyway? Why do we need to pay them potentially £40,000?
Well, this is all due to the wisdom and the skill of the last government. And when they arranged or organised or signed a certain exit treaty called Brexit, what we lost was the EU's access and treaty agreements with all of the countries that we had. Now, what we should have done before we did that, or hastily afterwards, is arrange return agreements with individual countries. Now, up until a few years ago, in fact, even 2 or 3 years ago, we only had 6 agreements. And if you think of how many countries there are in the world, that's how many return agreements we should have had. So the last government really messed things up with Brexit and in relation to returns. So we still don't have enough returns agreements with countries, and we can't send people back without a return agreement. Even countries with which we do have returns agreements, sometimes they don't play ball. Countries like India and Pakistan are notorious for that sort of stuff. So therefore, following on from the Danish system and what Denmark have started to do, and they've done it successfully, is they've said to the families, look, we're going to remove you anyway in any essence once we have a return agreement signed. But if you go now voluntarily, then we will drip feed you this 40,000 or X amount of money. That's important for people to know before people get hysterical about it. No one's going to be writing out a check for 40,000 and handing it over to asylum seeker and say, off you go, or handing them £40,000 cash, as it were, in the hand. This is very drip-fed. Even the current £3,000 scheme, which in fact Reform themselves were saying they were going to up to £5,000 about 6 months ago, if they ever came in. The £3,000 is given in drips, so you're given £500 and a plane ticket to go back. Then after 6 months, if you're still in the country, you're given another payment. Then after a year, you're given another payment. So you've got to ensure that you have gone back and settled or resettled in another country or your home country. Otherwise, what people would do is take the 40,000 and then just go somewhere else using that money.
Yeah. And I presume then that the government's thinking is this will save money in the long term, because if that family then agrees to, let's use the India example, if that family goes back to India and lives there, then it means that they are no longer the responsibility of the British government to house them in the UK.
Exactly. And if you've got a family of 5 or a family of 6, then some families are living in 4 or 5 bedroom house, maybe even in West London, Central London, East London, and they're costly. That's going to cost. Or hotels. And if you've got to say, teenage children, they might need their own room, in effect. So this is going to, it's almost saying, well, hold on, we want to reduce the asylum hotel accommodation bill. And remember, this government has said before 2029, or by 2029, it wants to have 0 people in hotels. And the latest figures released over the weekend suggest that it's now gone down, the hotel accommodation, and they are getting people out of hotels. And that's about 30,000 odd asylum seekers currently in hotels compared to what it was a higher number before. So that's the idea of the government. We're going to save money by throwing some money at it. And if the asylum seekers say, well, hold on, the money might go into my pocket, and we're failed anyway, we're refused, we're not allowed to work here, we'll be sent back at some stage, maybe in a year or maybe in a year and a half, it might be incentivize them to go back now. It's definitely working in Denmark.
And do we know over what kind of periods the money will be drip-fed? Because, let me put this text from Elaine into you. She said, Nigel Farage has hit the nail on the head. They'll just keep coming back and getting more money each time.
Well, the fact is, it will cost them money to come back. So it costs a person an average between £5,000 to £20,000 to come here illegally. So in relation to if they're getting £500 or £1,000 to go back, that's not enough for them to come back 6 months later. This is why the money is going to be drip-fed, and I'm assuming it's going to be over a number of years, because that's what other countries do, and that's what Shabana Mahmood would be wise to be advised to do. This is all depending on who's advising her, of course, to do this, but she has been to Denmark a few times. She is impressed with that system. They do seem to have things under control a lot better than perhaps the UK has. But then again, Denmark is a different scenario. They don't have a small boats crisis, or don't have people crossing on a lot of small boats, whereas the UK does. So it's something she's going to experiment. It's only going to be 100 to 150 families. It's not going to incentivize other people. I don't think it's going to incentivize people. They're not going to spend £20,000 to have £1,000 to go back. It might, even if they manage to get 10 families off their bill, it will save some money. Whether the families accept it or just think, you know what, forget it, we don't want your £40,000 over 5 years. I'd rather just stay here for a year. That's a different question altogether.
Yeah, well,
and whether any country will take them.
And that was what was kind of occurring to me. I just wonder whether the £40,000 is enough, because if it's going to be staggered over potentially a few years, then and if somebody has indeed spent as much money trying to get to the UK in the first place as you suggest that families are spending, then why are they going to say, yeah, that's fine, after all that effort I've gone to, after all that risk I may or may not have taken with my family, putting my children at risk to get to the UK, that's fine, yeah, for 500 quid I'm going to go back to India. Are people really going to do that?
Well, that depends. Remember, it's not £40,000 per person, it's £10,000 per person.
For the family,
So you might have one person who says, actually, I'm going to go back, and I'll take the 10,000 and I'll go back. And as for Nigel Farage being right, well, Nigel Farage is offering 5 himself in the recent thing. That's more than currently what Labour are offering. So Reform have toyed with the idea and have put that in. Now, Reform don't document anything. That's a different problem, that we haven't got anything in writing to say, right, well, this is, or anything expansive in writing, like a 30, 40-page policy where we can pick it apart. But that is definitely being uttered from the horse's mouth as it is. So a lot of parties across the board do consider it. And this was in the last government as well, the offering of the £3,000. So all parties are definitely up for this. Whether the migrants accept it or not, that's something they would have to have a look at an economic position. If they think, well, hold on, we can stay illegally for 10 years here, or until we get removed and make more money, I don't know how, but however, rather than go back, that's something each family will consider economically. But if you've got someone who's been here 10 years and had enough, and he's got no permission to work, and he's working cash in hand and working day by day, just paying his rent and just about surviving, or being housed by relatives and hiding from immigration, he might say, that I want to go back. And remember, the latest figures show that last year in 2025, 28,000 people returned voluntarily. So 10,000 people were forcibly put on boats and sent back, but 28,000 people had enough of living here illegally and went back themselves. So if 28,000 people in a year are going back, then maybe these hundreds just might follow suit.
And just to go back to the point that you were focusing on a few minutes ago, but just to make sure that I and my listeners have got a full understanding of it.
Yeah.
And you obviously know the process that this thing takes. There will be some of my listeners that will say, look, it should be very straightforward. If somebody has come from a country, we know where they've come from, and we assess their asylum application and we deem it to be the case that they're not a genuine asylum seeker.
Yeah.
Even if we don't have a returns agreement with that country, tough. Why can't we just stick them on the next plane back to that country, fly them there and leave them in the airport at that other country, and then they become their problem? Why is it not that straightforward?
That is just not straightforward. It breaks every single international law, and you can't send somebody back to a potentially dangerous situation, especially where there's death. So if Iranians came here, if an Iranian in the current situation came here, I want asylum, you couldn't just ship them back to Tehran while it's being bombed. While there's people dying or schools are being bombed. bombed there, or Beirut, if someone came from Beirut or Lebanon and said, I want asylum, you can't send them back. It's not physically possible, and it's not morally, responsible to send someone back to their death.
But wouldn't they be genuine asylum seekers then?
Well, they might not qualify for asylum, but they wouldn't be able to go back because they've got nothing to go back to. Their home might have been, bombed. That's not to say that every home in Lebanon or in Iran is in danger at the moment, but they might say, I've got nothing to go back to. Where are you going to send me to? I've got no home there. I've got no family there. But, so that is not that might be a difference in offering humanitarian protection on human rights grounds and offering actual asylum, where they themselves personally might not be persecuted because of their race, gender, nationality, or sexual orientation. However, they cannot go back due to the situation in the country. So there is a big difference here. There's also a moral duty that we have to consider as a country, and that is, if we continue to profit from the sale of weapons to countries that make these people homeless in the first place, is it fair then to say, well, hold on, we'll take the profits from the bombs that are dropping on you and killing your family and destroying your houses, but we don't want anything to do with your housing, you're taking any responsibilities. Surely if we want to take the moral high ground and we don't want any responsibility, then we shouldn't be profiting from the sale of weapons to the countries that are bombing them in the first place. That doesn't take much of a moral stance to realise that.
Really interesting speaking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time today.
GLS Solicitors is led by award-winning solicitor Harjap Singh Bhangal. GLS Solicitors, when the experts need an expert.